Well, the first day I got back to Utah last month, over a month ago now, I received an unexpected letter, rather lengthy one, from everyone's favorite cult leader, Jacque Fresco. This letter runs about 7.5 pages in Word. There's a couple of spaces in it, but it's pretty much all text. In the YouTube chat box, it was very, very long. This was unsolicited, and I read it at the time, but since I wasn't able to upload videos back then, I really just kind of put it aside. And of course, during the course of that month, I came up with other ideas about things that I consider, quite frankly, more pertinent than um, the Venus Project cult is. But it's a really juicy letter. And so just today I went through it again. I'm going to post the entire text of it in the description of this video. I have to wait till this video is actually uploaded on YouTube before I can do that. So if you happen to see this in the first 20 minutes or whatever that it's up, it might not be there, but I will post it there just so that you all get to read it. It's kind of interesting to see where this person slash these people are coming from. Before I go into it, I am going to put a big qualifier here. I am not sure who this person is. The YouTube user's name is Jacque Fresco. They have a YouTube channel with lots of videos of Jacque Fresco. There are about 14 or 15,000 subscribers on this channel, so it's one of the bigger Venus Project channels. The person in the text, and this person has commented on my videos before, sent me PMs before, they very often refer to themselves as Jacque Fresco. They refer to themselves in the first person, like I do this, I do that. Some of the points they brought up would even indicate that they were an older person. For instance, he talks about the person on the other side references the technologies of the 1950s and the 40s as being superior today, like he remembers them as such, which not many Venus Project people proponents are old enough to be thinking about or to reference materials from the 40s or 50s, whereas Jacque Fresco, that would be right up his alley. On the other hand, and this is similar, lots of collectivists do this, there's uh, an unjustifiable and very creepy substitution of plural pronouns for singular pronouns. So a lot of we and are used in ways that grammatically are unjustifiable and are, like I said, also creepy. There seems to be this idea that if I say something, it's suspect, but if we say something, then it has added validity, which is, of course, completely ridiculous. So when he says "are" and "we," he never specifies who he is referring to explicitly. I would assume he means the Venus Project, although in other parts the implication is everybody on Earth, which is an unbelievable exaggeration. So my guess is this is not Jacque Fresco, that it is very likely somebody close to him or very, very active within the Venus Project, active enough to be running a pretty successful Venus Project channel, someone who's also active enough to be finding all the anti-Venus Project videos. I'm not tagging these people in my videos. I'm not spreading them to them, and usually whenever I upload one, within just a couple hours, at the very least within a day, he will show up on there. So he's not subscribed to me. I get the impression this is the kind of person who is basically searching the term the Venus Project every day and addressing all those videos. So this could be Jacque Fresco. I doubt it, but it's somebody very, very committed to the Venus Project, and what they wrote is very interesting, not only in the totally retarded, unscientific, unfounded, collectivistic assumptions that are everywhere in there, but also the contradictions and also the rampant bait and switching. The stuff that is in this letter is totally different from the zeitgeist movement, utopianism, and that's the only word for it that we get, that is being sold to so many half-wits out there who, they want good things, and then they see these nice photoshopped make-believe land fantasies, and they buy it. And the stuff in this letter is not talking about what they are. So, like I said, I will put the entire text in the description of this video. I'm going to quote from it at length just in my response and kind of the the give and take here is I'm going to read a bit of the letter and then I'm going to respond to it. So let's get on with it. All right. Here we go. The first one that I took, which isn't his first words, are the concept of ownership is not only tricky, it is unjustifiable. No argument can demonstrate the validity of the concept. Well, concepts can be valid even if they aren't scientific. There are axiomatic things. I fully believe that you can't take um, a piece of property. Let's say, oh, just a random example. This book. This is just resources that have been altered by humans. We could take an electron microscope to this, and we will never find the proprietarian particle. We'll never find the gravitron, or which, by the way, we never found gravitrons either. But we'll never find the molecule in here that makes this private property, or let alone my private property. I mean, we could write in it, but that we could just take that microscope to the ink and we wouldn't find it. And this is, I don't know any proprietarians who believe this. I mean, there's the metaphor of mixing your labor with, mixing your labor and that, but that's a metaphor. That's not literally saying that my labor has imbued it with some additional property. Uh, the the argument for property is a wholly utilitarian one. If we don't have clear delineation of who is able to use what resources and in what context they're able to use those resources, then there's an incentive problem in producing anything, because why should I produce a resource? Why should I produce a good if others can freely take it at their discretion without any kind of input from me? I shouldn't. Uh, so we need to have some kind of property uh, system. What's interesting about this is the entire Venus project is predicated on the concept of universal ownership of everything. Now, their critique of private property and by individuals of select pieces of goods, if that's totally invalid, if that does not exist, then what's the basis for considering universal ownership of everything? Who's the scientist who won a Nobel Prize because they were studying a rock outcropping someplace, and a rock outcrop someplace, and they discovered, oh my gosh, look at these little particles. This says that this rock outcrop belongs to everybody and in the entire world simultaneously. Who discovered that? Did Jacque Fresco discover that? No one's discovered that. There's no innate uh, characteristic of any resource, of finished good or otherwise, that would indicate that it belongs to everyone in society. Yeah, this is the foundational premise of the Venus Project. The foundational all property claims are irrelevant except for the universal ones. But what's the scientific basis for those? There isn't one. They're just making that assumption, and then they have the gall to dismiss everyone else as unscientific. Next. Okay, I'm already discussed though on him. Yeah, so then he says, the scientific perspective reveals that property and ownership do not exist, but instead exist within the delusion of human imagination. Science doesn't exist either, except in the delusion of human imagination. Right and wrong do not exist except in the delusion of human imagination. Morality and ethics do not exist except in the delusion of human. There's no scientific reason to say that me chopping a person's head off is wrong. Science can just say, oh, look, the chemical properties of their body are altering. Their biology is changing. The effecting on the environment of your fucking blood as it gushes out of your neck onto the ground, that's going to have an effect on the surrounding ant colonies, and there's going to be an increase in the population of maggots as they eat out your eyes. But there's no scientific basis for saying, oh, it was murder for me to kill that person and it was wrong. None. And there is nothing in there, certainly nothing to say, oh, person X has more money than person Y, hence there's iniquity, and that's imbalance in the world that needs to be redressed. There's no scientific basis for coming to that. Egalitarianism is completely unscientific. That's the word he never used, but one that is implicit in just about every assumption he makes about the way the society ought to be. None of us are the same height, the same weight, the same dimensions, the same preferences, the same experiences, the same genetics. Yes, there are many, many similarities. We're the same species. We can interbreed. That doesn't make us the fucking same. and to then make this huge jump that, well, materially speaking, we all should be the same, or it should all be divided the same, or that we should all be given the same consideration, or that we all have the same claim on everything. Based on what? You've brought in a whole bunch of presuppositions that are, if anything, are not scientific, and yet feel perfectly justified in forcing those preferences on everybody. Completely erroneous and worthy of contempt. Let's see. Right, and he even says the result is no one has any right to anything whatsoever, or the alternative is every person has every right to everything. No, if even if we accept your first statement that there's no such things as right to anything, it doesn't then logically follow that everyone has a right to everything. Again, if we let's just accept there's no such thing as personal property. You know that an individual cannot own property. It then does not logically follow that everybody owns everything. You've I don't even think you could. You're skipping a step. You're skipping numerous steps. You have an end result that you want, and you're just asserting it. Is what I'm reading here. There's no scientific proof leading to this. There's no argumentation. There's no peer-reviewed study. There's just your opinion that you are now asserting as a fact, and patting yourself on the back for being an intellectual giant in the process, which is pathetic. Let's see. Oh, Matt Barrow is messaging me. I'll talk to you later, Matt. You'll see this reference in this video and be flattered. Um, then he says ownership is inapplicable in the RBE. Instead, usership exists as a purely natural and demonstrable concept. Well, usership is demonstrable, but ownership is a term that is used to describe that. I guess you could say usership occurs at all levels of nature, whereas ownership does not. All resources are not the property of a central authority, as you say. What is the central authority you speak of? The authority is the algorithms built into the computer system with which humans have interface for input and feedback. So he's refuting my claim that the TVP is just a state. There's going to be some all-powerful agency controlling everything, but he's which he will later basically admit to, but he just calls it by another name. Yes, here we go. Money is no longer necessary as an information processing technology. All processing occurs in a different technology and in terms of new metrics of accounting, no longer by price. New metrics of accounting that he does not specify or elaborate, or exists even. He makes several references to some new unit of account that will make all of this possible, but he doesn't even have a name for this unit. He doesn't describe what it even is that it's measuring. Is it measuring value? Is it measuring utility? How does one do that? Fundamental questions that he does not even he doesn't answer, but he's actually, it's not even that. I think he doesn't even realize that that's directly implied there. If you're not going to use prices as a measure of cost accounting, what are you going to use? Well, they're going to use a new metric, he says, but he can't elaborate as to what. Let alone come up with a convincing one. Let's see. Here we are. So he sent me this message, I presume, in response to my latest video where I was saying, look, there's a finite amount of resources in the world. There's a finite amount of production that's possible. So the society will not be able to indulge every whim that people may come up with. Even for people who are thinking about bettering the society with new technologies, say, I have a design for a new maglev train or a different type of transport, there aren't enough resources to simply build all of these things. And so how are you going to decide what is built and what is not built? And I'm asserting that such an agency is going to be, in effect, a state. I mean, if you have an agent, some institution within society that is determining how resources are being used, then that institution has more say over resources than do people who are not members of this institution. He goes on. The approval of projects comes from the degree to which the project satisfies criteria. This criteria is predicated upon principles upon which all people will likely agree, one being minimum expenditure, maximum gain. Okay, minimum expenditure. There's a lot in here that's quite interesting. Minimum expenditures and maximum gain. Okay, what's the unit of expenditure? And he could say, well, it's going to be labor and it's going to be intellectual capital, and those are true, those are things, but how valuable is a unit of labor? How valuable is a unit of mental expenditure? I like expending mental exertions, but when I read art, when I talk to Venus Project people, I get the impression that many of them are not very interested in expending much intellectual capital. People value those things differently, and so there isn't a metric to measure them. We all think differently, so you can't just say, well, so many calories of brain thought. Those don't all equal the same thing. There is no standard there. There's no standard of how much we value them, and there's no standard of how much we value the end result either. There's no metric of value. This is why I shouldn't say, why people like me tend to dismiss the Venus Project as Marxism, because you have these all of this depends on some type of objective theory of value which you don't possess, which you never delineate, which others have tried. The most famous example of objective valuation is the labor theory of value, which is associated with Karl Marx because it's the foundation of Marxist economics and his morality. Now, it didn't come from Marx. Adam Smith and other classical economists actually came up with the idea of the labor theory of value, and without going into it, it is completely erroneous. This is why one of the reasons why Marxism is so retarded and will not work and makes no sense in the real world. Um, However, Venus Project people, as the Marxists in denial that they are, here we're making arguments that require an objective theory of value, even explicitly calling for, quote, new metrics, which are never really outlined, which are never explained, certainly never defended. Uh, yeah, so the other problem here is the criteria is predicated upon principles upon which all people will likely agree. I think that is absolutely silly. Again, assuming unanimity or close to that to basically whisk away problems people have with your society, to say, well, everyone will agree. I'm sorry, that's not a valid assumption. Um, I'm objecting to the Venus Project. I'm not alone. So you're just going to assume that at some point I and everyone else who objects to the Venus Project or has different values than somebody else, we could even agree with the Venus Project, but maybe we think that we should build X, Y, and Z as opposed to A, B, and C. Well, then we would have different, the metrics that you're creating will come up with different results for the two groups, which means the system will collapse, which means you're going to have to just, you're assuming that we won't exist, which is a kind of creepy way of saying we won't be around, or we will be indoctrinated. And I asked this question in all seriousness to Jacque Fresco in the comment section of my last video, because again, he was making arguments predicated on everyone agreeing, and I'll put it out here. The Venus Project calls explicitly for the coordination and control of all the Earth's, or at the very least, all the continents' resources. Uh, it doesn't say, well, we only need this much gold and this much silver and this much petroleum and this much copper, and we can make the Venus Project work. They demand ownership of everything. Now, as it stands, most of the resources they require are held in private hands, which means they will either have to get all those people to voluntarily give up their property and those resources, that the control of which is necessary for the Venus Project. So, assuming unanimity and they all give them over, they could do that. And if people don't want to give over their resources, then the Venus Project will have to coerce them. It will have to take the resources anyway against their will. The definition of coercion. And they seem unwilling to confront this basic reality. The only argument is to make the stupid assumption that no one will disagree. Again, let's just have, I'm going to predicate a system where I'm the God King of the world, but there won't be any ethical or moral qualms about that, because I'm just going to assume that everybody supports and that everyone wants me to be the king of the world. Does that sound like a really convincing argument? No. So I'd asked Fresco, how many re-education camps does he think he's going to need to convince everyone to go along with the Venus Project? It was not a rhetorical question. It was a serious question that he declined to answer. He sent me this long email, or this long message, where he did not answer that question. And again, he makes the same stupid assumption that prompted that question in the first place. It's real fucking bright, this guy is. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Expenditure and gain is measured only in scientific units, the only means by which one can be sure to yield practical results. Oh, scientific units. What are the scientific units? What are they? How are they measured? What's their basis? He again is explicitly saying they exist, but he cannot outline what they are, how relevant that whatever system he comes up is going to be to humanity, to individual humans. Not there, just assuming that it exists willy-nilly without even explaining how. Blah blah blah. Okay. Here we go. He's talking about the free market system here. However, the projects of these entrepreneurs have unaccounted costs that they do not pay for. Therefore, they essentially steal from other people without anyone realizing it, usually not until much later. He's talking about the costs of the free market system. First of all, he doesn't believe in private property, and without the concept of private property, the concept of theft or stealing is completely makes no sense. It's an invalid concept. If you say there's no such thing as property, then there's no such thing as theft. They're not stealing from anybody. You don't think there's such a thing as property, and you can't go around saying that capitalists are robbing other people, because as far as you're concerned, nobody owns it. Or you make the logical leap, since nobody owns it, everybody owns it. In which case, if everybody owns it, how can one steal from another? Doesn't make any sense. Completely incoherent. But whatever, that doesn't matter. We have a vision that we have to see through, and details like reality just don't matter. Let's see. In vetoing ideas/project, innovators are not stifled. That's interesting. This is due to his use of pronouns again. This is due to our estimation of how people will behave when their basic needs are satiated. Humans demand more than their basic needs, and we have since before the Paleolithic. So how that would be like a standard by which to judge your society is just silly. If our estimations, again if our estimations of human nature are correct, and they're obviously not, then under proper conditions, people will become innovative, creative, and productive. Okay, so we're just going to assume everyone is those things, which I actually agree. I think that people are. But they also have ambition to be, free. But whatever, that doesn't matter. A population of self-actualized people will give rise to projects with a wide range of variations, just as occurs in the free market. This is interesting. This Marxist idea that free markets are basically the very next thing before the TVP, but whatever. These projects will have varying performance ratios, again based on what rubric. Uh, those at the top, those with minimum expenditure with maximum gain. Again, how are we measuring expenditures and gain? It's not enough to just say in labor or energy, because those are not the units by which humans measure expenditure and gain. Certainly not only those, but whatever. Will be granted execution, just as in the free market. Enterprises where projects with a maximum expenditure and minimum expenditure and maximum gain for both producer and consumer ultimately prevail over the other projects. So here he's basically saying, look, TVP will be fine because it will accurately ape the free market, except the gains and expenditures in the free market use the price mechanism, which is based on the arbitrage of the aggregate of all um, transactions on the market, using money as a medium of exchange, using prices based on subjective values of the buyers and the sellers. So that works in a free market. You're talking about a different system that's going to ape the free market, but it's going to use metrics: no money, no prices, no private property. You don't outline how it's going to do it without those little tiny elements, and still the best thing you can do is say it's going to kind of pretend to be that way. I don't know. And interesting again, who is rejecting? If everyone, if everything is equal, if the whole society is egalitarian and we're all just equally owning everything, then who is this is nonsensical to then say, well, one inventor will be denied while another one will be granted. Who's doing the denying and the granting? If we're all equal, clearly the person who gets denied is not getting equal treatment to the person who's getting their ideas implemented. And what is this agency that is doing it? What's the interface? Is every single person in the society going to get into a giant arena? Maybe you know technology today, it could be digitally. We could just all have our little Skype hologram show up, and have the innovator stand at the bottom and and then we all vote, or we all put in our objective value metrics that you can't explain into the computer, and that none of it, most people don't know how to program, and certainly had no hand in programming, but yet somebody programmed it without making any mistakes or putting in their own personal biases, and it this aggregate of human consciousness, this collective, um, tells the inventor if we are or if we are not going to implement their idea. Um, Again, there's clearly a hierarchy here. There's clearly a differentiation between people, those whose ideas are supported and those whose ideas are not. It is completely erroneous then to use personal pronouns that apply to all the people when really there are subsets. Uh, we just want to pretend everything's equal, even though it clearly is not. Um, the very fact that a person's proposal is rejected gives them incentive to improve it, bolster their intellectual capital for which all information is free, so that their project can once again be proposed with improved performance ratios. Again, ratios based on metrics that you do not have, cannot describe, and do not even seem to have the intelligence to realize are necessary, but yet are fundamentally important to even begin to discuss the society you are proposing and so enthusiastic, not even proposing, enthusiastically proclaiming as the only possible solution to the world's problems. I mean, Venus Project people are not simply saying this is an alternative. Most of them couch this in apocalyptic terms that either we can all be destroyed or we can have the Venus Project, which will be a panacea for all intents and purposes, although we find out in this that it's not exactly what they sell people. Interesting. In a free enterprise, there where an entrepreneur's projects fail, not all his capital is reallocated. Indeed, much, not all, of the material, human, and financial capital is reallocated. However, so much of it loses financial value, which you think is completely irrelevant, that doesn't exist. But here he is talking about it. If you lose money, then that proves that you lost value. Like, the capital stock is still going to exist. It is going to be reallocated. Sometimes it will get wasted, but there's no situation that you can have where you will build something and then always come to fruition. Venus Project will build, and he admits this later, you could build something that it can end up being a waste, even in the Venus Project. When an entrepreneur does succeed, society is not always better off. I'm not sure society is better off by an entrepreneur successfully selling toys and candy or fast food, alcohol, tobacco, etc., anything adverse to health. Again, let me just finish this. They succeed at this because they have situated themselves to answer demand. However, there are tremendous costs unaccounted for in this affair. Regardless of such costs, society is not improved by their industries. These industries are essentially parasitic. They prey on irrational demand. Though such demand is perfectly natural, it does not contribute to the health of this social system. Interesting. So it's natural demand, but it's also irrational. This is your personal preferences taking preference over others and then just assuming that they're normative. I value my health, other people value their health, but not everyone values their health the same. For instance, this night I ate a pizza, or part of one anyway. I'm sorry, all my paleo friends. I have weaknesses, and they're not just, well, for pepperoni especially. Um, That's not to say it is objectively wrong that I ate a pizza. My value, or had fast food, or used toys or candy. These things have value. People put value in them, and they have a scale of value. Uh, uh, let's see, an ordinal scale, and so it's you're taking your personal preferences and assuming that they're normative. That's not justifiable. All right, so uh, just because people don't all value their health the same way. Some people say, you know what? Yes, I know it's unhealthy, but I like the pleasure of the taste or the psychic benefit that I gain from smoking the cigarette or smoking the marijuana or whatever. I like the warm feeling I get when I'm drunk. I don't do this. I never drink at all, but not people do it. Gambling, you can lose money gambling, but some people like the thrill of the risk. There's no objective way to say that they're wrong. This is just clearly I have my personal preferences. Everything else is wrong. I dismiss it, even though it's natural. And this is interesting. So the Venus Project, again, it's supposedly fulfilling the role of nature, yet it's saying that some human natural need wants demands are wrong and not going to be fulfilled. Um, See, meanwhile, in RBE, though there is likely also a rational demand, there is no incentive to answer it. Great, so human demands will be stifled in the Venus Project, but since they're not demands that you personally like, that's not a problem for you. Okay. Regarding the calculation problem, well, here we go. Libertarians' favorite objection to the Venus Project, their least favorite thing to talk about. There are several methods proposed for overcoming the problem. One has to be one has been to obligate a consumer to work in proportion to the sum total of their consumption for resources. Essentially, they are billed in terms of the work hours. They could be assigned to general management of data processing centers, or more ideally assigned to problem solving, i.e., reversing the scarcity of those resources they consume. Thus, the degree to which they value their free time and the degree to which they value consuming a particular item will determine how much they consume. Oh, so it's not whatever you need or demand. It's not whatever you want. It's whatever you earn by working for the collective. So this is not addressing the calculation problem. This is the incentive problem right here. Again, I think it shows their inability to understand uh, basic economics, and basic economics is describing reality, so it's not just some voodoo neoliberal make-believe that we concocted to confound people who are trying to make the world better. Practically speaking, let's say people are going to demand a certain number of goods, likely in the millions of different goods, but let's just, for simplicity's sake, say these goods are numbered um, A through Z, although it would really be 1 through 100 million or whatever. At a given point, the demand for all these goods is a given amount. And if demand for all those goods never changed, it would be very simple to say, okay, well, we're just going to we'll need this many factories building A, and this many factories building B, and this many factories building C. And if nothing ever changed, it would be that simple. But as we all understand, things do change. So let's say we have a certain amount, we have a production that is geared towards satisfying the desires for all these goods. And let's say the demand for P and R increases. Now, we can have two assumptions of the capital stock of our society going into this. One is that the capital stock can always meet whatever increases there are in demand for any goods at any point without ever curtailing production of any other goods. So an increase for demand in P&R will have absolutely no effect on the production of all other goods if their demand stays the same. If it doesn't stay the same, if it rises, the industrial capacity, capital stock of society can just satiate whatever demand comes about instantly, without foregoing the production of anything else. That is a totally unreasonable assumption. It would literally call for an infinite productive capacity at any given moment, or approaching infinity. Um, a more likely scenario is that the one that exists today, that will always exist so long as there's finite capital stock, is that there won't be enough resources available to simultaneously fill the increased demand for P and R, whatever numbers I picked, and at the same time continue the demand for all other goods. And so a question arises: what should they curtail production of? What should they increase production of? If P and R go up, and you can't assume that they're just going to be able to satiate that demand without making sacrifices someplace else. The question arises: where are you going to sacrifice? This is not answered in his answer here. He's talking about the incentive problem, which is another big problem with the Venus Project, but it's not the economic calculation problem. They're different problems. Are you going to have to curtail production of A or of B or a little bit of N and O? Uh, how do you make that decision? That's what the calculation problem is. All right, his couple solutions here, none of them are addressing that, which means he fundamentally doesn't understand the calculation problem. But it isn't just some economic mumbo jumbo. Unless your capital stock can always satiate any increase in demand without there being any need to curtail production on any other good, which I think is a completely unreasonable assumption, then you're going to have to make decisions about curtailing production someplace else. And the calculation problem is how are you going to decide what you're going to cut back on, what, and so forth. That's the question. Let's see what his other answers are, though. Okay. Another, and I might also point out this solution here, it completely goes against the whole you're going to get whatever you want, whatever. It's basically, or the whole idea that only 10% of the people are going to have to work. What this is saying is everyone's going to have to work. Although it says you won't have to work very much, again, based on nothing, but whatever. Another proposal has been to implement an artificial daily, weekly, or monthly point system in which points symbolically represent a person's consumption, waste, reuse, and generation of resources. This is similar to the technocracy, it is the technocracy that you for some reason want to distinguish from yourself anyway, system in which energy credits are proposed. In each case, a person is given a set amount of points, and is uh, and as production capacity and efficiency increases, everyone's purchasing power points increases in proportion. Again, points, uh, what's measuring points? You don't have a metric for this. People don't all value energy the same, and so what's the basis for saying your unit of account is going to be energy? Um, Again, this is a rationing system, which is something like I and many others have pointed out. The Venus Project does not promise you anything or whatever you want. The Venus Project says we're going to take over all the world's resources. Goddamn anyone who owns resources and doesn't desire this. And then we are going to divide them up equally, and you're going to get your share of gruel, and that's it. You can't have more. Um, and you should just be, that's how many you get. This is what this is saying: you get so many points, and that's it. The other one is saying you can get more points if you work harder. Again, that's not egalitarian either, but whatever. Blah, blah, blah. Lastly, items that depend upon scarce resources, which is practically everything, by the way, at some layer of production, are less likely to be consumed on the individual level, not only because there would likely be a social stigma against doing so, but because of time factors. So I've raised many issues about things that are scarce, not because they're unique, but only because they illustrate the point better. You can't just assume that we're going to give everybody whatever they want, especially when you're talking about resources that are very, very finite. Uh, and the example that I like to use the most, which again is not addressed by what he says here, really is Stradivarius violins. Again, the Venus Project tells everyone you can do whatever we want. They keep saying you can be a painter, you can be a musician. I happen to be a musician. I happen to know a lot of musicians, and I know that ones who play the violin really would all like to own Stradivarius violins. And by say own, they'd all like to use them. They'd all like to have one that they can play. You cannot build more Stradivarius violins. You can build replicas of them, and maybe very good replicas, although this is currently not possible. But people value the real thing, even if a replica is spot on. And as things are today, the demand for Stradivarius is so high that they cost millions of dollars. So what are you going to do with Stradivarius violins? Not everyone who could possibly want one can have one. Not all the time, not whenever they want one. So are you just going to move them around? And if so, how are you to determine the order? Again, there's no egalitarian way to do this. Uh, I guess the argument here is that if they're scarce, they'll be stigmatized. So we're going to stigmatize people who play the violin and would like to be able to play on a historical piece created by the undisputed master of violins. That should be stigmatized. People who want to live on the beach in Key West should be stigmatized. People who want they're so they're just going to stigmatize things that the Venus Project can't deliver. Again, so forget all that rhetoric about you get whatever you want. The Venus Project is going to give you what the Venus Project provides, and anything else should be stigmatized. Yes, that's really forward thinking. Why don't you put that in Zeitgeist? Uh, though a free market may not have artificial scarcity, this is what this is the basic critique of free markets is they create artificial scarcity. That's what the whole Zeitgeist movie is about. That's what all your anti-market, anti-capitalism, anti-freedom, pro-socialism, pro-Marxist, pro-Venus Project cult members believe is that there's artificial scarcity. I call him the fuck out on this because the price on all goods is going down. Goods are becoming more available to people. I challenge him to name goods where this isn't the case. If there's artificial scarcity, how come they're becoming more available? And he concedes the point, even though it contradicts every little bit of rhetoric that they have. Yes, so though the free market may not have artificial scarcity, it does restrain the levy, it says levy of abundance for all people by keeping profit exclusive and keeping the control of resources diffuse. Keeping them diffuse, they're still on the market for everybody, so it doesn't matter uh, the fact that there are millions of people who own chocolate plantations. Chocolate is more available now than it was if, say, there was a monopoly on chocolate plantations. I think that's pretty obvious. Or vanilla, or silver, or gold, or copper, or petroleum. Do you think if we had a petroleum monopoly institution that there would be more or less petroleum than if there are thousands of owners? And there should be even more. The state, and I'm not just talking about petroleum. The state restricts how many people can market products or even own them. Uh, Again, what is the basis for assuming that diffuse ownership equals inability to access? All empirical evidence, big empiricists here, points to the opposite conclusion. I mean, if it's diffuse enough, then everybody would actually own a little bit of it. If it's centralized, this kind of is against this contradicts the whole rhetoric of everyone owning everything. If everyone owns everything, then all resources, they're not diffuse then, they're centralized in this body that you pretend is everybody, but intellectually, practically speaking, there's no way to affect that kind of ownership. Let's see. Yeah, this is not to mention it guarantees social turbulence due to its Darwinistic imperatives of self-preservation. Yeah, self-preservation is a terrible idea. I can see where they're going with the whole there's going to be unanimity, ignoring questions of people who disagree, and then they discourage self-preservation. So I think I can tell where this is going to go. And many other problems about which economists know nothing, because economists don't know anything about human welfare. That's what economists are studying. You don't know anything about economists. You don't know anything about biology. Don't really know anything about science. I don't know any scientists who say that they discover that common ownership of everything is like a fact, that it's a law of physics or something. But you freely flaunt that kind of bullshit. And then he goes on to say, I would love to move to a critique of the free enterprise system at some point. Weaknesses of a free enterprise system are far numerous than RBE, and I'm curious to hear your defense. Yeah, they're so numerous that he can't name any. I'm not gonna. I have hundreds of videos. Uh, More than half of them talk about a positive case for a free market. I'll only say that if you're going to critique a free market, critique a free market don't point to the status quo and then just conflate that with the free market. There are aspects of our current system that are free market, just as there are aspects in it that are collective and that are socialistic. You're going to have a little bit more discernment and you know, specifying exactly what's free market, what's not, what a free market society would be. To just say, look, now 70% of the wealth is held in 10% of the hands. Well, we have a state, and that has some effect, and you got to explain, how it would be different. And to just say, and this is the way the Venus Project people are. They're all, oh, we don't like the state, we don't like the state, and then, well, we need the state. If we didn't have the state, everything would be 10 times worse. And so many Venus Project cult members on my videos who insist that they're not socialists and that they're not Marxists go on and on and on about how great socialism and how great Denmark is and how great the Soviet Union was and how great Sweden and Norway and the UK and Europe, since Europe is one country now apparently, it's actually getting close to that. Um, how socialism has a bad rap and how it's really a good idea and blah, 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 blah. So these people are just like the anarcho-syndicalists who fucking love the government, who love the states, who think it's, the only redeeming aspect of our society, although a more refined view of these more intelligent Venus Project members, shows an affinity with Marxism to the point where there's stages in history and capitalism is like, the necessary penultimate stage to utopia. Uh, but their utopia shows no feasibility whatsoever. It is absolutely authoritarian. It is creepy in its dismissal of dissent and its assumption that there won't be any. Again, what scientific basis is there for assuming there will be no dissent? Is there any historical, empirical basis for coming to that conclusion? This is why people like me hate the Venus Project so much, because there is if history is to be a judge, the way unanimity is achieved is by liquidating dissenting parties. And given the Venus Project's rationalization of the ethics that they will use to achieve their ends, one can hardly be surprised if they would be willing to kill people and just say it's for their own good. We're not really stealing from them because they don't really own everything. I mean, here our TVP institution is, going around taking all the resources, reallocating them, destroying all property that is in the way of the construction of our perfect society, and yet have the gall to think that there's universal ownership of everything by everybody, not the people that they are aggressing against, who have a more valid claim to their goods than third parties who've never seen them, don't even know that they exist. So, like I said, I'm going to upload this. This is a fairly long video. I wasn't planning to make another Venus Project video, but I didn't think I'd be getting a 7-page letter from the fucking cult master himself, or at least one of his high-ranking acolytes, or at least that's how it appears. Like I said, if you watch this video and it's not in the description, it will be soon. I just got to wait till it gets uploaded. And that's it.